Thunderbolts is a different kind of Marvel Studios film. Right from the start of the marketing campaign, it didn't feel like the typical Marvel lightweight dross we've come to know. Specifically those later trailers, man, they definitely signaled a different kind of Marvel Studios film. Like maybe this was a film that actually had a point to it, you know? That maybe the writers weren't phoning this one in. That themes like loneliness and depression and guilt might actually be explored, and characters might actually be given some real depth. And Thunderbolts had a pretty solid gimmick behind it too. It's a team-up movie that focuses on the lesser-known, hardly touched characters that were introduced in a bunch of shitty assorted TV shows and movies. And I like that, man. I like the idea of taking characters who had solid potential, but who got practically zero development like Ghost in Ant-Man 2, or characters who were totally mishandled like John Walker from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and giving them a second chance. So is Thunderbolts exactly what Marvel needs right now? Yes it is. Thunderbolts is a straightforward, largely standalone movie with a tight focus on its characters and themes, and shit man, I actually can't remember the last time I said that about a Marvel film. I mean, Deadpool and Wolverine did some nice character work with Logan for sure. The only problem was though that there just wasn't enough of it in that film. That's not the case here with Thunderbolts. The characters and themes are front and center, with the overall story a secondary focus. And I'm fine with that. I'll take a film with tight characterization and meaningful character development over a film with an airtight story any day. It's character work over story on this channel. The first thing that really jumped out at me was how much time was actually put into forming the team and establishing each individual character. And this would have been the stuff that would have been so easy to just skip right over, and I was afraid that the writers actually would do that we wouldn't really get the team established properly, that we wouldn't get to see the interpersonal dynamics. But the writers really take their time here. The first part of this movie is largely focused on the Thunderbolts just working to find a way out of this bunker. And it really works. There's real time given to showing the characters bouncing off each other, distrusting each other, and arguing over what their plan of attack should be, because everyone believes they have the best plan. This is the kind of stuff you always hope the writers will lean into in this type of film. And this was the fundamental character and team building stuff that was really missing from that first Squad film by David Ayer. One of the things I've always wanted out of the MCU was an honest exploration of what being a superhero would mean for a person in terms of personal cost. And we get that here with Yelena, and it paints a pretty bleak picture. Okay, there's a caveat. I know that Yelena is not a superhero in the MCU, but still, we're seeing the toll this life is taking on her. How alienated she is from other people. Yelena tearfully explains to Red Guardian, in probably the best scene in the whole film, of how she has no one to go home to, how she drinks herself to sleep because she can't bear the loneliness and the thoughts of some of the things she's had to do, being forced to do. And then we actually get to see that. We see her passed out on her bathroom floor towards the end of the film, with a bottle of vodka in one hand, and it's ugly to watch, but it's a powerful image too. If I had to sell Thunderbolts on one thing, it would be this stuff. Thunderbolts doesn't shy away from ugly subject matter. It embraces it. It actually focuses on it. To a lesser degree, this was the kind of stuff I wanted to see in the MCU Spider-Man flicks. Minus the whole blackout drunk stuff. But you know what I mean? The exploration of cost that leading a life like this would take on someone. I find this stuff really interesting, but it's the stuff that I feel the Marvel films really go out of their way to ignore sometimes. And isn't this kind of development we're seeing here with Yelena not just more interesting than the usual play-it-safe character bullshit we typically get from the MCU nowadays? We see characters go through traumatic stuff all the time in these films, but never do we actually get to see the fallout of that, the damage explored. I feel like we don't get those genuinely human moments that legitimately stick with you from the MCU anymore. I mean, sometimes we do, but they're the exception, not the rule. You get plenty of that stuff in the Guardians films, but the other films on the slate, they rarely ever kind of get emotional like this. They rarely ever get real like this. Imagine if we could have got a comparable scene to Yelena's here with Red Guardians, with Johnny Storm in Deadpool and Wolverine. But no, it's just more satisfying from a character standpoint to see Johnny Storm crush his balls on a big sign, I guess. It's almost like when the writers lean into the darker, more uncomfortable and often depressing stuff instead of running away from it at every turn. It makes for a more interesting character that people can actually respond to. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is one of those shows that's just bad in its own right. But it also has that distinction of being the rare breed of show that somehow becomes even worse in retrospect when you're familiar with the particular storyline that show was trying to adapt. I have a pretty complicated relationship with the MCU's take on John Walker, Captain America. See, I really like Wyatt Russell as an actor. I think he's a good pick for the character. And I love that first Mark Grunwald John Walker arc that introduces him as Cap's replacement. It's probably one of the all-time great Captain America stories, being honest. But I hated, and I mean hated, the way the writers on Falcon and the Winter Soldier tried to adapt that storyline, and the way it handled the character of John Walker. This guy, the MCU version of John Walker, is nothing like this guy from the comics. For one thing, this guy is way more interesting in the books. The writers took all of that interesting character stuff that John Walker is known for in the comics, all the stuff that actually makes John Walker Captain America so compelling, his attitude, his extremism, his violent demeanor, and sandpapered it all away, leaving behind a character that's John Walker in name only. But here in Thunderbolts, I actually like John Walker. Not because the writers are trying to bring the character more in line with how he is in the comics, they're definitely not trying to do that, but they're taking the shattered pieces of this character from Falcon and the Winter Soldier and assembling them into a new, more rounded, interesting, and likable character here. We're seeing a version of John Walker whose marriage has fallen apart, and all the fallout that comes with that. A guy who is struggling to deal with the repercussions of his actions, of how he's perceived by the public. They've given this guy some depth, something actually interesting to play with. He's not like the John Walker from the comics, he's not even close. But Thunderbolts has pulled off the impossible feat of actually making me care about a character, making me actually like a character that I had fully written off as collateral damage. I can't remember a time the MCU has actually made me totally revise my opinion on a particular take of a character. But I like John Walker now, man, and that's a miracle for me to say considering how much I really hated the way he was handled in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You know, it's pretty apparent ever since the end of Endgame that Marvel really doesn't know what to do with Bucky Barnes as a character anymore. Bucky is kind of stuck in this weird limbo where he can't step into the Cap mantle because that position's been filled, and he can't really take on another persona because there really isn't another one for him to occupy. And it would be a massive backstep to regress him back to the Winter Soldier persona. So Bucky is just kind of left in this awkward middle ground. I mean, Bucky wasn't even a secondary character in Captain America Brave New World. He had a cameo in that. And if he's not even a presence in the Captain America films, where the hell is he actually meant to be? But Thunderbolts actually fixes this problem. Joanna Callow and Eric Pearson find a legitimately ideal role for Bucky to fill in the MCU, as the guy who has to initially guide this team of broken, traumatized misfits. And who better than Bucky to do that, man, when you think about it? Bucky is probably the one guy in the MCU who's had a more messed up and traumatic history than all of these guys. He's ideally placed on the Thunderbolts to be a kind of stabilizing influence on the team. A guy who's been traumatized and who's managed to overcome that trauma, and who can now guide other people on how to move forward. Bucky being on this team, showing the others that it is in fact possible to overcome their problems and even channel them into something good, feels like a strong direction for the character. Not really feeling Bucky as a senator though, that came out of nowhere, can't get behind that creative decision for the character, but his role on the Thunderbolts, that feels like natural progression. That feels like a good place to put Bucky. Sentry was a bit of a concern for me going into this flick, because honestly I had no idea what the writers would do with this character, and I had every reason to believe that Bob Reynolds would just become another in a long line of goofy, quirky characters. And you know exactly what I mean by that, man. Marvel has this really irritating trope where they take what should be typically super intimidating, super powerful characters from the comics and make them into these quirky or downright goofy facsimils of themselves, like with Kang and Loki or Ultron. You could add Thor to that list too, I guess. And man, it would have been so easy for Bob Reynolds to become MCUified in that same way in a lesser script. In a lesser script, I could for sure see the writers just omitting all the darker elements of the Sentry's backstory, and just having him be this kind of super shy guy that spouts this "so that just happened" kind of dialogue. Amanda Callow and Eric Pearson thankfully don't do that here, and they really don't hold back with the Sentry at all. There's so much uncomfortable subject matter around this character that I'm surprised they got away with touching on as much of it as they did. Subjects like drug addiction and mental health and all that other stuff when he was growing up, it's a lot for a film with a rating of PG-13. And all of these subjects and the focus on them would be nothing if not for Lewis Pullman's performance, who can just effortlessly switch between shy to intimidating to outright villainous on the fly. This guy's performance as Bob Reynolds is so good that you could just tell from the way that Bob carries himself in his introduction that he's gone through some stuff, that he has issues. And I don't mean from his dialogue, it's just in the way he looks, his facial expressions. This guy just looks like he's been in it for a while, you know? Everything about him just screams damaged. Got to appreciate depth like that when it comes to an actor's performance, you rarely see it. So that's all the good stuff, but what about the bad? Well, Thunderbolts is a pretty good flick, but it's not a perfect one, and it does have some problems. The story is kind of predictable. Like I said at the start, the story is obviously a secondary focus in this film. but it really shows as well. That often used trope of a group of characters coming together and then falling out only to come back together again at the end for the final showdown is present here. Also, the ending feels really rushed and kinda nonsensical. There's a whole impeachment storyline for the character of Valentina Allegra de Fontaine that just falls totally by the wayside at the end of the film. Why Valentina would want to put the Thunderbolts front and center with a bunch of reporters when she has every reason to believe they would expose her. I mean, she's tried multiple times to have these guys killed. Why would she think they would just play ball with her in front of the media? And also, why the Thunderbolts just suddenly start going along with her is also never explained. I thought Bucky's whole story in this film revolved around him exposing her. Why did he suddenly not do that when he literally had the perfect opportunity? Inconsistencies like these I can forgive, but what's less easy to forgive is the obviously cut content. You might have noticed that I haven't said anything at all about the other member of the Thunderbolts that was in all of the marketing and posters. Taskmaster. Yeah, Taskmaster is in this film for about 1 minute and has, I think, no lie, 5 actual words of dialogue before she gets murked. She doesn't make it out of this bunker here. Look man, I'm aware that nobody cares about MCU Taskmaster. Nobody cares about that Black Widow film where she was introduced either, and rightly so, it's a legitimately awful film. But this was a second chance to maybe redeem this character a little bit. The only thing that was accomplished by this basically meaningless death was that Taskmaster is now permanently off the table, which actually sucks when you think about it, since the whole theme of this movie is how broken people can redeem themselves by coming together. I'm pretty sure the writers could have done something interesting with this version of Taskmaster in a sequel. It does sound like Taskmaster actually had a pretty significant part in this film at one point, and not just at the scripting stage either. I thought these shots of Taskmaster in scenes from the trailer that weren't in the final edit were just digital inserts to hide the fact that she dies early in the film, the old Joel Bamboozle from The Last of Us Part 2, but I guess these shots are the original footage from before her story was just entirely cut out of the film. I guess the decision was made to murk Taskmaster instead of removing her outright, was just to give the audience the impression that the stakes are higher in this film, that any character could be killed off at any moment. But that trick only works with characters the audience has come to know by spending time with, and not with characters that have 1 minute and 10 seconds of screen time, with an accompanying 5 words of dialogue. It's just a really baffling decision to include this character only to kill her off. You could cut what little screen time Taskmaster has entirely out of this film, and it wouldn't make any difference to the overall end product, and you'd at least be keeping your options open with using this character somewhere down the road. Fun fact, apparently one of the writers on Thunderbolts, Eric Pearson, didn't even know that the whole Taskmaster arc he wrote was cut from the film until he actually saw it. I love modern filmmaking. Ghost also draws the short straw in this film. Apparently her story arc, which was tied closely into Taskmaster's, was also cut for time, and it really shows, man, because she has functionally nothing to do in this film other than to give out some occasional snark and add a bit of colour to the fight scenes with her powers. I say that cutting this stuff is less forgivable because really the strongest part of Thunderbolts is the character development, the character arcs, and the interpersonal dynamics. In an ensemble movie like this, that's always the stuff that's the most entertaining. Would have been nice if we could have had a bit more of it, and it really sucks to know that there was more of it, but it was cut out last minute to make the film more lean. For all intents and purposes, this is the film of Yelena, John Walker, Bob Reynolds, and Ava Starr. It's their film, and we learn a great deal about Yelena, man, and what's going on with her. And because we get to learn more about her, we have more of an appreciation for her character. Same with John Walker. I entered this film with no appreciation for this take on the character and left the cinema actually liking him the most of all the characters in this film. And I love that, man. I love that Jennifer Callow and Eric Pearson have taken a character I'd totally written off and made me care about them. In the case of Ghost and Taskmaster though, I was legit curious going in wondering what the writers were going to do with these two, and I left the film disappointed on that front because these two characters might as well not have been in this film, and that's a shame. This is more of a personal nitpick. I've never been a fan of the whole washed out, desaturated color grading technique that Marvel just loves throwing on their films. You've got some sick costumes here. It would be nice if we could actually make out the colors on some of them without getting eye strain. What is this, an episode of Titans? What's with all the blue and grey? So drab looking, man, Jesus. You know what's really appreciated? The fact that every dramatic scene or impactful moment isn't immediately intercut with some dumbass stupid one-liner. I was positive the first time that Bob showed up in his Sentry costume walking down the stairs in Avengers Tower Someone, probably Ghost, was going to make some stupid ass joke or snarky comment about it. But no, to my surprise, the scene was actually treated seriously. And it needed to be in that moment, man, to get Sentry over as an intimidating threat. Again, it would have been so easy to undercut the scene with humor, but the writers understood you shouldn't cut the legs out from under your main antagonist during his introduction. If you're a follower of this channel, and I really doubt you are, but if you are, you'll probably know I'm not a fan of the way that humor is utilized in these films. I feel like it's just easier for the writers on these projects to insert a stupid bullshit joke into a scene than it is for them to actually write a more impactful, emotional one. Humor isn't absent from this film. There's plenty of humor here, it's just used more sparingly, and it's not forced into scenes where it has no place being. So is Thunderbolts Asterix exactly what Marvel needs right now? Are we back with Thunderbolts? I'm not going to say we're back. Marvel Studios has lost a lot of ground with me, man, over the last few years. 2 good movies in the last 12 months doesn't make up for like 6 years of downright low-effort shit. It's going to take a lot more than 2 good films for me to say that Marvel is out of its decline period. I'm not going to say that Marvel is so back. I'm going to say that Marvel is on the right track instead. How about that? But look, man, I'm not saying anything you haven't heard me say on this channel before. Marvel Studios could have pulled themselves out of this slump they've been in since Endgame any time in the last 6 years if they wanted to. They just didn't think they had to. Prevailing thought at Marvel the last few years was that you could just put out the most basic, low-effort slop. But so long as it had the Marvel Studios logo slapped all over it, you were fine. When in fact all Marvel Studios really had to do to pull itself out of its slump was to produce scripts that actually had some depth to them, that actually had proper character development. And that's what Thunderbolts is. It's not breaking the mold or reinventing the rules. It's just a film that actually had effort put into it. Having, themes and character development and emotional depth in your script isn't a reason to celebrate a film. These things are like the bare minimum requirement for a story. And it's actually kind of funny just how reintroducing these incredibly basic things back into your scripts has people saying that this is the best Marvel flick in years. Marvel didn't need to reinvent the wheel with Thunderbolts to get people interested in the MCU again. All they had to do was try, put some effort in. Effort was the key ingredient that was missing all along. Apparently, Thunderbolts Asterix is the first and best example of Marvel Studios' new movie strategy. The new strategy is to produce good scripts now, I guess, as opposed to low-effort one. Sounds like a winner. I think the success of Thunderbolts has reminded the higher-ups at Marvel that general audiences don't just like super films with actual substance. They want superhero films with actual substance. They have an appetite for them. Again, not sure why a studio would need to be reminded of that. These films already proved this point a long time ago. Thunderbolts makes the strongest case I've seen in a while that Marvel Studios can recapture their previous success and push the MCU forward at the same time with new characters. It's not necessary to take a back step and sign up all the old favorites again like Robert Downey Jr., and yes, that includes the Russos too for a greatest hits comeback tour. All Marvel Studios ever had to do to have the next Avengers, figuratively, not literally, on their hands was to do exactly what they did here with Thunderbolts. Take a group of characters, develop those characters, and get people invested in those characters. People did not embrace a lot of the newer MCU characters because they weren't the characters they were familiar with. They did not embrace them because they were resistant to change. No, they didn't embrace them because the films and TV shows they were in were awful. The character development just wasn't there. You can make any character work, man. All you need to do is put the time and effort into them. And to make my point as clear as possible, the characters that I now like the most in the MCU, the ones I'm the most hyped for, are a team consisting of a secondary character from a truly awful film, a forgettable sympathetic villain from an even more forgettable movie, a mishandled secondary character from probably the worst Disney Plus Marvel show, and a new character who has exactly one solid appearance under his belt. That's the power of investing in your characters. That's the result you can achieve when you actually take this stuff seriously. Marvel Studios could forge a pretty bright future for itself creatively speaking by just embracing the old tenets of what made them successful to begin with, by making their characters three-dimensional, and by hard pivoting away from the low-hanging fruit that is the stupid humor and replacing it with real emotional depth, and by respecting your audience enough to understand that they can appreciate a film that has themes and proper character development to it. If Marvel can keep producing films with this level of effort behind them, and with a tight focus on its characters, then Marvel will be, as they say, back. Already Marvel does look to be taking what worked with Thunderbolts and incorporating it into the next phase. The X-Men 100% needs the same level of honest, heartfelt storytelling that Drake Schreier brought here with Thunderbolts. Nice to see Marvel actually understanding the assignment for a change. So, a bit late with this one, but want to get my thoughts out there on Thunderbolts. I'm legitimately interested in seeing what's going to happen with these characters in the next phase. In a way I haven't been in, Jesus, I don't know how long. It's nice to actually be invested in characters again, you know? Feels good. Anyway, Thunderbolts, it's good shit. Let me know what you guys think about it below. Like, share and subscribe and all that jazz. And as always,